Good morning, grade 10. So this is how we're going to do school from now on. So welcome to my shop. I think I borrowed Emerson's engine from the school, so now it lives with me. I adopted it. So to do job 4, we have to start with our reference data. So the important stuff here is it's a Champion spark plug, QC12YC is the name on the spark plug. When we clean it and gap it, we have to set it to 30 thousandths of an inch. And when we set the air gap, it has to be between 8 thousandths and 12 thousandths of an inch. So we're going to use a feeler gauge that is 10 thousandths of an inch. All this stuff, this will be on the multiple choice test. It's going to be easy. So I laid out the tools we're going to need. We're going to need a couple sockets, 8s and 10s. Got a nice multimeter here. You can buy these at Canadian Tire on sale for under 20 bucks, and you'll save yourself lots of money by learning how to test your own coils. We have a feeler gauge for setting the air gap on the coil. We have a torque wrench for putting the spark plug back in, or the flywheel torque back on. And the things that I missed here were a pry bar and a hammer for freeing up the flywheel, and a needle nose for putting the wires back on the switch, and a magnet tool for like picking up the bolts that got stuck in there I couldn't get with my big fat fingers. Okay, a little multimeter theory here. I have the meter set to ohms, which measures resistance. And when we use it to test coils, we can check the resistance of the coil, but we can also tell if the wire is broken or shorting out. So when we connect the leads together, this is a perfect path for electricity to flow. And so we get a very low resistance. This is 0.1, and that's just really reading the resistance of the leads. But that is very, very low. That is like perfect. So that would be like a short in your coil where the wire is broken and it's found a shorter path to travel. The second diagram, it's on ohms again. And this time you can see there's a space in here where the two leads are not touching, and on the meter it says OL, and OL stands for open line, which means there's a break. So if the coil breaks, the wire on the coil breaks, you can tell that it's not continuous, and that coil will be no good either. So this is a snip of our worksheet that we would have done in class. So we're testing using an ohm meter. If we get 0, that's a 0 on the scale on the ohm meter. That means there's no resistance, and that indicates there's probably a short in your coil. That was my best O there. Okay, and if you get OL, usually there's a decimal point right there. That means open line, and there's no electricity traveling through the windings, and so you get a broken wire. The coil's not going to work, so that is a broken wire. Broke. This is hard. Oh, I'm way better on the chalkboard. Never mind that. W-I-R-E. Bam. Okay, here's some more theory. This is the inside of a coil. Coil actually has 2 coils of wire in it. The primary winding is a short, fatter winding right here. and it is a thicker wire that's shorter in length. And then there's a secondary winding, which I'll highlight in blue here, and it has a thinner wire that is longer. So how this works is the magnet on the flywheel swings by the primary winding and induces a voltage on here. And then the secondary windings actually wrapped around this. Okay, this diagram's just simplified. And because there's many more windings of the secondary coil, it can multiply the voltage. So you might have 100 turns of primary and thousands of turns of secondary, and therefore you can take a small voltage on the primary and jack it up to 10,000 volts to make a spark on your spark plug. When you measure the resistance, the short thick wire is going to have a lower resistance, and the long thin wire will have a longer resistance. So on the worksheet on the next slide, I'll give you some general readings that you can use for all coils, and then we'll test our engine. Here's our worksheet again. Primary windings. When you make this test, you're going to connect the multimeter to one lead to the kill wire here, and I drew it red because you might use the red wire, the red lead, and the black one is going to go grounded to the core, and that's your primary circuit. It's a short fat wire. You're going to have a resistance of between 1 and 10 ohms. And when you make your test on the secondary, you're going to take the lead off of here and plug it into the end of the spark plug wire. And that's going to check the long thin wire, and you're going to have a reading in thousands. So it's going to be a very big number. Of course, if you don't get a reading exactly in these ranges, it's okay. But if you do get 0, you're shorted out, and if you get open line, it's a broken wire. Got 4 pictures here. The first picture, we're testing the secondary winding. So you can see the lead is plugged into the spark plug wire, and the other lead is on the iron core. We are looking for a reading in the thousands. So in the second picture, I zoomed it in, and this says 5.4 kilo ohms. K is kilo ohms, so it says that it's actually times 1,000. So that's 5,400 ohms, which is exactly what we should have. We should have a reading in the thousands. The next picture here is the test of the primary. We have the lead on the kill tab right here, and the second one is on the ground on the iron core, and we have exactly 1 ohm. So we were looking for a range, 1 to 10, so it's right in the range. It's not an open line, it's not a direct short, so this coil is good. And as a bonus here, some engines have a resistor cap, and this type of engine does have a resistor cap, and most of them have it printed on the side. You can test it with the ohmmeter again. This one is a 5,000 ohm resistor cap. The reading is 4.84 times 1,000, so 4,840 ohms, close enough to 5,000, so the cap is good. In my experience, this cap will go bad and it will stop sparking, and you can check that, replace that for $10, $15 and not have to buy a $100 coil. Next, check the flywheel key. On a lawnmower, the key would be right here. On all engines, the key is right here. And on a lawnmower, this key is designed to break. If you hit something with the blade, instead of twisting up the crankshaft, this key will shear, and then the engine will be out of time, which means the spark will happen at the wrong time. This is very common on a lawnmower, something that you could check if your lawnmower engine is not running correctly. Here I've taken the flywheel off with an impact gun, saving all the pieces, and then in the little video, I'm removing the flywheel. So there's no way to put a puller on this one here, so I put the nut on, checking to make sure that it's flush, and then I take a pry bar and underneath the flywheel where it's safe, I'm applying a twisting force, which is pulling the flywheel up, and a couple good hits on the nut loosens the flywheel, and then pull that off, check the key, or replace it if it's sheared. Pretty common job. Here's a close-up of a lawnmower flywheel that I repaired for somebody. They had hit something, sheared the key in here, like it twisted around, and then when I was inspecting it, I noticed this crack right here. So if this had been installed again and torqued down, that would have stressed that taper right here even more, and that could have led to a failure. So this flywheel would be spinning at 3,000 RPM, and if that crack made its way out to the edge, this flywheel could break and become a grenade. Very dangerous. So I saved a life that day. After the flywheel's installed, we have to set the flywheel gap. So here's my feeler gauge, 10 thousandths of an inch. This copper color one is the same thickness. The writing is worn off. It's copper, so it's not magnetic. So if you watch the video here, when I put the feeler gauge in between the magnet and the coil, the silver one sticks to the magnet. So I have to fight that in. And I put both sides in, and then I loosen the nuts here, the bolts here, and the coil will suck in. And then all you have to do is just tighten that back up again. And then you fight out the feeler gauge, and then you just check to make sure that the flywheel doesn't rub. Done job. Here we're going to clean a spark plug. Got some sandpaper here, and I like to fold it in half so it gets a little stiffer. And I slide that down, and I'm trying to clean the carbon off of the porcelain center electrode. That is the part that will become contaminated in the foul. So I just sand that back and forth a few times, and then after that's clean, I like to use some compressed air and then blow the grit off, because you don't want that grit, air, going into the engine. So there we go. And I use a spark plug gapper tool here, and I've set the gap to 30 thousandths. That was in our reference data. You could also use a feeler gauge. This is just handier and quicker. And then once it's gapped and clean, you reinstall that in the engine. After you reassemble the engine, you should always test the kill switch before starting. That is the ignition service on an engine. Once you're done the job or done this video, find the link to the multiple choice test, and that's how we're going to tell if you learned anything from today. Thank you very much.